Bold Bytes, your bite-sized guide to payments.
Thank you all for joining today. I know this topic is something that kind of ebbs and flows in our industry, and sometimes we see a lot of activity with transaction processing excellence fees and data integrity fees, but sometimes we don't. And so it's great to have you all join today just for the sake of learning about something that might not be on the forefront right now, but definitely is something that peeks its head out every so often and is great to have this information at hand to be able to move forward. So today we're going to be discussing TPE and data integrity fees, really the programs that go behind them and how we can help prevent our merchants from experiencing and receiving unnecessary fees when the issues that are there are pretty preventable. Normally, I do not start with the meat and potatoes, but today you get everything right up front, which is why should you care about these fees and these programs? Typically the fees that are incurred are anywhere between 3 cents to 30 cents per event. So it's very easy to say, 6 cents. Why should I care? That's 6 cents. No one can really care about that or should really care about that. Well, I'm here to tell you why. So when a merchant starts to see fees on their statement that are not really explainable, there's not really any reason behind it. It's not a monthly fee that they agreed to. It's not a non-compliance fee for PCI or TIN validation. It's just this other fee that's 6 cents that they weren't aware was going to be happening. You didn't expect that it was going to be something that was present on their statement, and therefore you now have to explain to them what this is and why it's occurring. And although 3 cents per event is not that big of a deal, if something is actually incorrectly set up with their system, those events, you can have over 100 or 200 of those events, which now brings the total to, let's say, $3 or $12. And let's say you don't catch it the first month that they get these fees. And now they're seeing those fees compound month after month after month. And one day, 12 months from now, they go and look and they see let's call it $15 fee on their account that is for data integrity, and they don't understand what this is. And they start looking back at every single one of their statements for the last year, and they see that these fees have been occurring, and they start wondering, what is this? So they reach out to you and they say, hey, I'm losing money on this fee. What is this? Why is it happening? Help. And that is where the issues really start to arise for you and the merchant, the partner in the merchant's relationship, is that now you have to kind of take that blame. There is a problem with their setup, or they're functioning in a way that is causing data to be transferred to the card brands in a not ideal way that is causing these fees to incur. And now you are the one who's having to take that responsibility. So it starts to make the relationship lose that trust, because they're paying every month for these fees and you're the reason why. So now they're able to start opening up that scope and identifying other areas that they can say, well, I'm not happy with this, and I'm not happy with that, and what's wrong with this, and what's going on here. And that starts to you start to basically, this once pretty solid foundation of a relationship just starts to erode, and you're not able to really hold on to the pieces that you were once pretty confident were going to stay as they were. So the issue too is that we do get these lists from the processor of these errors that are occurring and these fees that are going to happen with merchants. But the only way that we get this list is if the processor actually breaches the threshold. So the only way that anyone really knows about this is if the amount of merchants under the whole book of business with the processor breaches the errors, and now we start getting the fees incurred spread throughout all of the per event merchant issues and errors. So now it could be something where it wasn't happening for a couple of months and then all of a sudden it's happening. So it's a hard thing to really track until it's there, and that can be really frustrating. So we want to help you get ahead of that the best way that we can so that you're not losing trust in your relationship. The second point of why you should care is investment, right? So if holding on to a merchant that you've had for years or might be relatively new, you're constantly, let's just call it $125 a month in revenue. You're constantly making that. And because of that consistency, that's a pretty great, stable relationship to want to invest in to maintain. If these fees start incurring and the issues are not resolved or the problems are not taken care of, then now you're looking at possibly attriting the merchant and then now having to invest in bringing a new merchant on, which is labor for your team, having to make calls and get people onboarded, having new equipment sent out, shipping costs, things of that nature, creating new deals with people. And it's time and money spent that could have easily been avoided. So the other part of it is being that you have this value added resource that you're providing. So most ISOs, ISVs, agents, POS resellers, they're not necessarily going to be people who are actively trying to solve these issues for merchants. It's a couple of cents, it's a couple of dollars. What's the big deal? Okay, bye, have a great day, come on in. Based on the rest of the education series that I've been providing, we want you to be able to have a much stronger and more foundational relationship with your merchants. And so if you're providing access to the understanding of holding that accountability, saying, hey, there must be something wrong with the setup or maybe the way that you're processing transactions. We'd like to get more information or figure out what it is that's going on so that we can get ahead of these fees and solve the problems now so that we're not incurring any more losses, right? So this is something for you to show that you care. Just one more step, one more, I'm your partner, I'm your advocate, and I'm here to help you get past this and get through this the best way that I can. So we're going to start with transaction processing excellence fees. So these are going to be more along the lines of, these are going to be actually higher fees, if I'm being honest. And they're the ones that have kind of the bigger scope that needs to be fixed because it's not a data entry issue, it's a function issue. So the transaction processing excellence, or as I'm going to refer to it because that is a mouthful from here on out, is TPE. The TPE fees, or the program, I should say, was designed to eliminate unnecessary network traffic. So information that's coming through incorrectly or partially, but never actually completed. And you'll see that trend throughout the different examples that I provide. So there are several errors that occur with the TPE program, but really 3 of them you see more commonly, and then I'll go through some of the more uncommon ones toward the end. But the one that we see the most is going to be final authorization. So these are going to be transactions that are actually ran as final sales instead of authorization. So if you have a final sale set up and you're a automotive center or you're a retail center or what have you, you don't deal with gratuity, that's fine having just a final sale. You bought this product, you paid for this product settled at this cost. No problem. What we're seeing is that areas where there are gratuities, so restaurants, nail salons, things of that nature, the way that they're set up is that the transaction is actually being ran as a final sale, and then the system is trying to update that tip on top of it that is then changing a sale, which it really shouldn't be. A sale is final. An authorization can be adjusted. So we really only see the final authorization error in gratuity-based industries. So that is someplace where, as a partner, you will want to look at the way that your merchants, whether standalone terminal or POS integrated system, is communicating those sales. So if that is something where you do tip and you're not authorizing the transaction, you're creating a sale and then adding a tip on top of it, you are providing unnecessary network traffic for MasterCard that they don't like. I'm not saying that they're correct in not liking this. I'm saying that they have to figure out a way to make things harder, and they did. So this error we do see mostly in gratuity fashion. So this would be someplace where you would want to go check it out, figure out whether or not that's set up correctly, and then moving forward from there. Undefined authorization not reversed. So this is going to be where you have a transaction that was authorized and you're not necessarily voiding it to reverse. You're not actually reversing this authorization where it's clearing from the system. You're more so just deleting it. So this isn't something that is with every system. This isn't something that you can really necessarily look into. But if you do start to get notifications from us that this is an error that's being received, then it would basically be a functionality within the POS that would probably need to be identified, figured out, and resolved, where you're legitimately looking at what happens after you void a transaction. Did the transaction go away completely, no record of it at all, or and reversed, or was it just left in limbo somewhere, deleted but not actually taken care of? So this is one that we don't see as often, but it is one of the higher ones that we do see. Like I said, final authorizations is really the one that's the most, and then moving forward from there. And then pre-authorization. So I have hated pre-authorization since the moment I joined this industry. They are good for some things, and so I do not discount that they do have importance to them, but it is a system that causes issues. And in some circumstances, you have pre-authorizations where you, let's say, pre-auth for $1, and then you take that payment. So you take the card information and you move it from this check to this check, and that check is the one that gets settled. And the problem is that that initial authorization check, even though it's just $1, even though there's nothing really wrong with it, it's not being taken care of. It's not going away. And some circumstances that we've had with some of our partners where this was the error that they were receiving for a lot of their merchants, they didn't even know that their merchants were doing pre-authorizations. And so then they started looking into it, figuring out what was happening and going, okay, we now need to just train them on how to properly do a pre-authorization and then follow that transaction to the end. This is an area where if your system does have this functionality, just make sure you're communicating how it works to your merchants, even if they're not really planning to use it, so that if they do, they're doing it correctly and then they can avoid these fees. And then other less common events, so excessive authorization attempts. This is going to be a lot of times, for the most part, having to do with more card testing situations. So a bot or some sort of fraudster gets access to card information and they start attempting transactions over and over again on accounts to see if they will successfully go through. And if you attempt a card 10 or more times within a 24-hour period and it's declining each time, then that is when the excessive authorization attempts fee billing event will be the one that's present. Nominal amount authorization. So this, again, not really something that most merchants deal with, but just worth mentioning, is that if they do an account status check and they're using any nominal amount above $0, then that's causing issues, because basically they're attempting a transaction and they're checking to see if the account is in good standing, but they're utilizing an amount that they aren't necessarily reversing, or it's just kind of, again, a pending transaction that's in limbo that isn't actually going to clear. And that's where the issue lies. And then the final one is going to be the acquirer merchant advice code, which is basically 2 or more attempts, which is a very small amount, but 2 or more attempts on a card not present transaction within 30 days where the original decline that was received was do not retry or payment canceled. So these are very stop everything you're doing types of declines. And we have had partners in the past that, let's say, a merchant's batch didn't settle for months, right? And so we have to do a rekey, a large rekey, whether it's external or internal. And we're going and attempting these transactions. And the issue with that, which we all have experienced at one point or another, is that usually about only 40% of transactions actually end up going through correctly, getting approved and settling, and the merchant gets funded for those. So when you're in a circumstance where that happens, we've had a lot of partners where they say, okay, now go back and retry all 60% of the transactions that originally declined. And the problem is there's certain circumstances where it is fine to do that, where it's insufficient funds, right? So it's something where the insufficient fund decline code is they don't have money in their account right now to cover this transaction. They might be able to later, right? You wouldn't want to go into the attempting 10 or more times in 24 hours to try to get the money to come through. But there are ways that you can reattempt decline transactions in those large rekey situations. But if you do get do not retry or payment canceled, you need to stop where you are. That's it. Because if you do it 2 or more times, you're going to get those TPE fees, which we want to avoid. So we highly discourage that process if people come to us. So where to begin? How do we fix this? How do we prevent this? So as I've mentioned in other education series, there's ways to be proactive, and then there's ways to be productively reactive. And in this circumstance, if you have received notifications from us for TPE fees, which honestly, we haven't received one of these in a long time. So this isn't something where you will have noticed it in your inbox recently. And for those of you who joined the call a little later, as I mentioned, this is a TPE fees and data integrity fees are things that you do not see all the time. This is not a consistent thing that happens, but it is something where when it does, it's good to know about what's happening. And it's a system that ebbs and flows with the industry. So you might not have anything right now about this. This is more so for the future. But if you've received notifications from us, then start with the merchants on the list. Figure out what the billing event is, which will be provided to you in the list that we get. And if it's not, ask for it so that we can help get that information. Utilize, and again, I'm going to be sending out the FAQ with it, utilize the FAQ to understand what it is that is occurring with this billing event and how to address it. Because more than likely, it is going to be pre-authorizations that are incorrectly handled at the end, or final authorizations where it's running as a sale instead of an auth, and you're trying to adjust a tip on top of it. You might need, depending on the integration, depending on how the merchant is set up, it might be a situation where you have to communicate with the POS software, the dev team, to make sure that they know that transactions are going through as sales instead of authorizations. I basically spent the better part of 2 years working with the PAX team to try to get them to fix restaurant templates in order to be able to have them come through as authorizations instead of sales. And it takes time, and it's not something that can be fixed overnight, as we know, but it is something that if you start addressing it as long as you're being tenacious and really, really sticking with it, they can help resolve the issue at some point. If you have not received these notifications from our team, then I would just confirm that you have merchant set up. So if you haven't received these notifications, it means that our processor hasn't breached the amount that they're allowed. And so it would just be a good idea to just any merchants that have been boarded probably in the last 2 years or so, just confirm that their file builds are set up to be restaurant instead of retail in a gratuity environment, that if they're utilizing pre-authorizations, that they're educated on how they should be doing it. And then also, just in circumstances of, hey, if you get a card that declines and it's a card not present transaction and you try 10 or more times in a span of 24 hours, you could get fees. That's something to just kind of heads up, right? It's not an everyday occurrence, but it is something to notify them about. So now we move to data integrity. Now, this one is a little less about how the merchant's set up and more about the information that we have input anywhere in the process and life cycle of a transaction. So most of the error codes that we see consistently are going to be some sort of piece of merchant data incorrectly input. So zip code. We've seen it where the phone number is where the zip code's supposed to be, or vice versa. The DBA doesn't match in all systems, right? So it's not matching from TSYS to the VAR sheet to the file build to the transaction. Somewhere along the way, it's not correct. So figuring out where that is and rectifying it. Invalid street address. Most of the times there's no street address. Like people just are leaving it out of the file build or certain circumstances. And that's like, well, if it's on the VAR sheet and it's someplace that you can put it into your terminal, then that's someplace where you need to make sure that it's there and it's there correctly. Merchant identification number. So this is going to be what I've seen in lists that we've had in the past is that they have there's a merchant ID and then there's the store ID. So they'll have the merchant ID in the merchant ID station, but then they have the for store ID at the end, or they're supposed to have it at the beginning and they kind of have it in the beginning, but then they also have it at the end. So it's just about making sure that matches in all systems as well. And sometimes it's a way that the parameters are set up that's how it's asking for the information. We see it all the time where it's like, well, with Deja Vu, it wants the store, or it doesn't want the store number, or it does want the store number, but then in the VAR sheet, it doesn't have the store number. And so you have to kind of adjust and figure out where that issue is coming from. And then the last one that you see in green, the CC missing data element 55, that one really is more so of a out of date or needing to be updated application, firmware, hardware, things of that nature. So that would be an area where you would want to just check to see when was the last time their application was updated. If you boarded them in 2021 and legitimately have not heard from them or talked to them since, they will likely be getting this code because there's an update that needs to be occurring for their system. Common frustrations that we've seen with the data integrity program is that it's hard to know when the change that you made has fixed the issue. So these fees get billed 1 to 2 months in arrears. And so you could fix the issue in May, still get a fee in June, and not know if it's fixed until July. So it can be a little frustrating because in June we'll reach out again and you'll say, wait, what's happening? I already fixed this. And it's like, yes, you did. And it might have worked, but hold on 1 more month, right? We'll get to the other side together. So just keeping you updated that it might not have, but that as of right now, we're waiting. It feels impossible to know where to look to solve the problem, which I will go over in the next slide. Minor fees. So is it worth the time and energy if they're only getting charged, 25 cents a month for this issue? Is it worth my time and energy to put toward to fix something? Because that is not necessarily something that is, you don't want to have to put your resources toward it. And I get that. But like I said in the beginning, if your merchant starts to lose trust in your relationship because of a setup issue, that's something where you're going to want to be attentive to. And then feel lack of support or knowledge. So I think being in this industry for almost 5 years and seeing, I used to be right on the ground, boots on the ground with these programs, and I've stepped further away and I've detached from it. But what I've seen in conversations I've had with partners over the years is that I feel like people are just making it a little bit more complicated than it really is. They're seeing it as this nebulous issue that cannot be solved, when really, if you just kind of hone in and check, you might actually be able to solve it relatively quickly. So the places to look. So actually, let me go back one slide again. So as you can see, there's areas here that are highlighted in orange, and then areas that are highlighted in green. And then there's areas that are just regular blue, and those are because they're the orange and blue are kind of dual used, where the green is someplace different. So now we go forward. So orange, terminal, check your parameters. It's likely that the DBA is misspelled, that the phone number is where the zip code should be, or vice versa, that you did not input a street address, things of that nature. Check the POS parameters, the terminal parameters, any file build, just anywhere that's there. Check there first, right? Because that's going to be the initial interaction with the card and the data and the transaction. So start there. That's going to be where you first move. The blue, which corresponds with the orange, is your middleware platforms that you use. Check there next. So check to see if the information in data cap is the same as what's going on the terminal, that it matches the VAR sheet, that it's completely across the board. Every interaction that you have access to as a partner, or that the merchant would have access to, is accurate throughout each part of the life cycle. Very rare instances. We did have an issue a little while ago, I think about a year ago, where the information between TSYS and the card brands was incorrect. It was something, I believe, having to do with the zip code, where it was not accurate in between. So we needed to go behind the scenes and figure out what was being communicated through areas that we do not have access to. These are areas that are beyond us. But we started at the terminal, we went to middleware, and we figured out that there must be something wrong with the processor. So I'll go over where to know when to get us involved in that circumstance in the next slide. But very rare circumstances, it's the processor communication between banks and card brands. So the green one, alternative fixes. This is going to be a situation where you need to just check the versions that you're on, the firmwares, if the terminal's end of life, if you need some sort of update to the application, or we see with Deja Vu, they completely cross out certain templates that say do not use after a certain amount of time because they're outdated, and they need you to update to the new one as soon as possible. So just kind of if you build your own files, just keeping up with those pieces of information and just checking in, making sure you are aware of where your merchants are at so that we can avoid these. And then, terminal end of life. So we usually hear about a terminal going toward the light, their end of life, pretty far in advance. You're not really going to hear, hey, next week, these terminals are going end of life, and that's the first anyone's heard of it. It's usually 6 months to a year out, you get some sort of notification about it. So getting prepared, right? Understanding what's your next terminal, what's the next version that you can start updating and upgrading all of your merchants to, so that you can start that process and start that conversation as early as possible. So where to begin with data integrity? If you have been receiving notifications from our teams about data integrity issues, then start with the people on the list. Seems interesting to go that far, but start with the people on the list that you receive. If we build your files, our file build team will already be working toward making sure you're on the updated versions, that we're all in line with that. If you have some sort of integration, that might be where we do try to get you involved, which is we're looking at the file builds that we have access to, and the information matches in our system, but does it match in a semi-integrated system? If there's updates that need to be made, whether it's to just the application or to the information within the parameters, that'll be something where our team will coordinate with you and the merchant to do a download or schedule a download, whether you're using packs or something of those natures, where we can help you get to that next step as smoothly as possible. But if you build your own files, then that would be, again, where you check with the terminal, check with the middleware, check all the areas that you actually have access to, and verify. And this is something that I wish I didn't have to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, which is that it can be frustrating in these circumstances. So actually check. Because if you say, hey, check in your parameters, and you go, okay, I checked, that you are doing everybody a disservice in that aspect, because we can't actually know what happened. We don't know where you checked and what you didn't check. So we could escalate this to the processor only to find out that we've just wasted months of everyone's time because there was a section that wasn't checked. So if you need help, don't hesitate to reach out to our teams. We're always happy to schedule time and have those conversations in order to be able to maybe share screens, check through your systems with you so that we're all on the same page if you really feel like you haven't been able to find where this issue is coming from. So if everything's accurate, and you've legitimately checked everything and you're like, nope, it's definitely not here, then reach out to our team and we will then now escalate this to the processor to see if it's maybe something on the back end that's happening. If you haven't received notifications from us yet, then start with your oldest clients. Start with people, like I said, who have been boarded, let's say 2023 and before. And if you haven't had contact with them, or you haven't really updated systems or really had to check on them, things have been running smoothly for years. This is probably where it will start to unravel. So getting ahead of it as soon as possible, making that plan for yourself will definitely help with that. And again, with end of life equipment, we know about it ahead of time, right? So work with our teams to figure out what that next version can be, what has the same functionality, what might actually have a function that works better for your merchant now than it did 5 years ago. Maybe they want contactless information. Like maybe they want certain things that they did not have with their old system, and that they want to start integrating. And that's where we will help you through that. So how can Bold help? So if you're looking for any hardware integration questions, next versions, end of life equipment that you need to get rid of and move on to new hardware, reach out to our PRM at boldpay.io, email or call in and press option 2. This will get you in touch with our sales rev ops team and our growth team, depending on what your relationship is with our company. And they'll be able to help answer questions, ask questions, figure out what's going on, and they can utilize other teams if there's any gaps that we need to address. So feel free to reach out to them if you have any questions about that. If you are looking through your file builds and you're having questions, that's when you're going to reach out to our client services team. So our support at boldpay.io email, or option 1 when you call into our support line. Just request some help from the file build team. They'll be happy to walk you through, schedule some time, figure out what's going on. And again, if we're the ones that are building your files, then that's the best place to start anyway. Everyone, thank you for joining after this holiday weekend, and we will see you next time.
Bold Bytes, your bite-sized guide to payments.